Most murder cases follow a pretty familiar pattern. Police find a suspect, gather evidence, make an arrest, and eventually the case goes to trial. It doesn't always happen that neatly, but that's usually how it's supposed to work. This case didn't get the memo. It starts in a quiet Louisiana town with a young couple who seemed to have everything going for them. By the end, there were multiple confessions, rumors of a cult, witnesses claiming people partied inside a murder scene, and a suspect who died before anyone could answer the one question everyone wanted to ask. What really happened that night is still up for debate. Pam Ellender was the kind of person everyone seemed to like. Growing up in Sulphur, Louisiana, she was voted one of the prettiest and friendliest girls in school. She was a cheerleader, became homecoming queen, and after college, married Eric Ellender, a young businessman with a promising future. They settled into a house not far from Pam's parents. Before long, they welcomed a baby daughter. By all accounts, it was exactly the life Pam had always wanted. In fact, she visited her parents so often that it became part of her daily routine. She'd simply walk over with the baby, spend some time with her family, then head back home. Nothing about February 11, 1991 seemed unusual. That evening, Eric called Pam while she was visiting her parents. He'd just gotten home from work and wanted to let her know he was there. Pretty normal phone call, probably lasted a minute or two. About half an hour later, Pam packed up the baby and headed home. No one realized it would be the last time her family would ever see her alive. The following afternoon, Pam's grandmother stopped by the house. Something immediately felt wrong. Instead of staying to investigate, she grabbed the baby, rushed back to the Littletons' home, and told Pam's father to call the sheriff. Deputies arrived first. Inside the master bedroom, they found Pam and Eric dead. Both had been shot with a shotgun while in bed. Their infant daughter, somehow, had been left completely unharmed. As tragic as the murders were, detectives quickly caught what looked like a lucky break. Eric's car had been stolen from the house. Not exactly the smartest souvenir to take after committing a double homicide. A short time later, an 18-year-old named Chris Prudhomme and 3 friends were spotted driving it in Baton Rouge. Police arrested them, and before long, Prudhomme confessed to killing Pam and Eric. Case closed, right? Not quite. Just 17 days after the murders, before the case could ever go to trial, Prudhomme was found hanging in the jail shower. He left behind a note claiming he alone was responsible. He even wrote that he had enjoyed taking their lives. For investigators, that was enough. The confession matched the arrest, and the suspect was dead. There wasn't much left to investigate. But Pam's father wasn't buying it. Huey Littleton wasn't just a grieving father. He was also a licensed private investigator. And the more he looked into the case, the less convinced he became that Chris Prudhomme had acted alone. So he started doing something most people would never have the patience for. He interviewed people, then more people, then even more. Eventually, he'd spoken with well over 100 witnesses, and that's when the story started taking some very strange turns. Several people claimed Prudhomme was connected to a group that called themselves the Skaters, allegedly short for Satan's Kids Against the Establishment. Now, before your brain jumps straight to an 80s horror movie, it's important to point out that authorities never found enough evidence to prove the group was responsible for the murders, but the stories kept coming. One witness claimed members of the group met the morning after the killings to get their story straight. Another alleged the plan had only been to burglarize the Ellenders' home, but the drugs and panic turned it into murder. Then came the claim that shocked even Huey. A young woman named Nikki Alderson said she had unknowingly attended a party inside Pam and Eric's house just minutes after the murders. According to her, people were drinking, using drugs, and acting strangely. She said Chris Prudhomme was there along with several others. The next day, she turned on the television and saw the news. The house on the screen looked familiar. Way too familiar. Only then did she realize she'd spent part of the previous night inside a home where two people had already been killed. If that's true, it's one of the most disturbing details in the entire case. The problem is, investigators said they found no evidence that any party had ever taken place. Then, the allegations became even more disturbing. Another witness claimed the victims' bodies had been abused after death. A man named Chip Richard later alleged he'd seen a videotape showing what happened inside the house that night. Authorities never found such a tape, and those claims have never been substantiated. Still, Huey kept digging. His investigation eventually led him to Robert Adkins, one of the young men arrested alongside Prudhomme in Eric's stolen car. Friends later claimed Adkins admitted he was inside the house when the murders happened, though accounts differed over who actually pulled the trigger. Years passed before prosecutors finally revisited the case. In 1995, Robert Adkins and two other men were indicted. Adkins eventually pleaded guilty to manslaughter. The other two received short sentences as accessories after the fact. That guilty plea confirmed one important thing. Chris Prudhomme hadn't been the only person connected to the crime. But it still didn't answer the biggest question. Who actually fired the shotgun? To this day, investigators maintain they followed the evidence and closed the case correctly. The Louisiana Attorney General's office considers the matter solved. Huey Littleton never agreed. He spent years trying to uncover every detail of what happened that night, convinced there were pieces of the story no one had ever admitted. Maybe Chris Prudhomme really was the killer who simply took his secrets to the grave. Or maybe the witnesses were right, and more people were inside that house than anyone has ever officially acknowledged. More than 30 years later, no court has ever fully reconstructed those final hours. And that's why the murders of Pam and Eric Ellender remain one of Louisiana's most unsettling mysteries. Not because no one was convicted, but because no one can say with complete certainty what really happened inside that house on the night of February 11, 1991. Imagine losing someone you love, then finally getting a copy of the autopsy report only to realize it doesn't seem to describe them at all. Different height, different weight, different physical details. At that point, you'd probably have a lot of questions. And honestly, wait, are we even talking about the same person? Would be somewhere near the top of the list. That's exactly what happened after 23-year-old Crystal Spencer was found dead inside her Los Angeles apartment in 1988. More than 3 decades later, her cause of death is still officially listed as undetermined. And, depending on who you ask, the biggest mystery isn't just how she died, it's whether the full truth ever came out. Like a lot of young people, Crystal moved to Los Angeles chasing a dream. She wanted to become an actress. Hollywood had a way of making those dreams look surprisingly close, at least from a distance. Actually making them happen, that's a completely different story. To pay the bills, Crystal took a job as an exotic dancer. It wasn't something she was proud of. Friends later said she'd often break down in tears because she hated what the job made her feel about herself. The money was good, sometimes hundreds of dollars in a single night, but to Crystal it was never meant to be a career. It was supposed to be temporary, just something to keep her afloat until her real opportunity came along. Then, in 1987, she met Anton Klein at a barbecue. On paper, they couldn't have been more different. Crystal was chasing auditions, while Anton was an aspiring screenwriter working toward a PhD. Somehow, though, they clicked almost immediately. Anton introduced her to museums, art galleries, and classical music. Crystal soaked it all in. She was curious about everything. The relationship gave her a glimpse of a life that felt far removed from late nights under bright club lights. There was just one problem. Anton had no idea she worked as a stripper. Crystal kept that part of her life hidden because she was terrified it would ruin the relationship. Eventually, though, a neighbor recognized her at the club and told Anton. Not exactly the kind of relationship update you hope comes from the neighborhood gossip. Anton was shocked, but according to Crystal's friends, he forgave her. To Crystal, it must have felt like a huge weight had finally been lifted. She even talked about quitting dancing altogether. Then, just months later, everything changed. In early May of 1988, Crystal came down with what seemed like the flu. Anton visited her while she recovered, and the two talked about an exciting opportunity she'd been offered to work in Japan. The next evening, they spoke again on the phone for about 15 minutes. Nothing seemed unusual. Anton told her he'd be in touch. She said goodbye. Neither of them knew it would be their last conversation. A few days later, Anton tried calling Crystal again. The phone was busy. He waited. Still busy. Back then, a non-stop busy signal usually meant one thing. Someone had left the receiver off the hook. Anton figured Crystal had already left for Japan and accidentally left the phone that way. Instead of getting an excited phone call from overseas, he received one from the Burbank Police Department. Crystal had been found dead inside her apartment. Investigators believed she'd been dead for nearly a week. At first, police suggested she may have died from natural causes. But when the autopsy was completed, things became even stranger. There were no drugs in her system, no alcohol, no obvious signs of suicide, and no clear evidence pointing to homicide. In the end, the coroner could only list the cause of death as undetermined. For most people, that would have been frustrating enough. For Anton, it was just the beginning. He couldn't shake one detail investigators mentioned. Crystal's body had reportedly been found in an unusual position inside her apartment, partially unclothed. Around the same time, neighbors came forward with something they hadn't told police right away. Several days before Crystal's body was discovered, they were awakened around 4 in the morning by terrifying screams coming from her apartment. One neighbor later said it sounded like someone was being tortured. She wanted to call the police. Her husband was afraid to get involved, so they stayed home. It's one of those decisions that's easy to judge years later, and one they'll likely never stop thinking about themselves. When they eventually gave statements to investigators, they felt police didn't seem particularly interested. Then came the detail that transformed a tragic death into a genuine mystery. Months after Crystal died, Anton finally managed to obtain a copy of the autopsy report. As he read through it, something didn't make sense. Crystal was just under 5 feet tall. The report listed the body as 5'7". She weighed around 105 pounds. The report described a well-nourished woman weighing approximately 140 pounds. Anton couldn't believe what he was reading. His immediate thought wasn't that the coroner had made mistakes. He wondered whether they'd performed the autopsy on the wrong body. Authorities strongly rejected that idea. According to the deputy district attorney, Crystal's remains had been identified through fingerprints by 2 separate agencies, making a mistaken identity virtually impossible. So what explains the discrepancies? Were they simply clerical errors made during an examination of a badly decomposed body? Were measurements estimated instead of carefully verified? Or did those mistakes point to deeper problems with the investigation? No one has ever provided an answer that satisfies everyone. Adding to Anton's frustration, he claimed he struggled to obtain police records related to the case. He even said one law enforcement official dismissed Crystal's death by telling him bad things happen to bad girls before ending the conversation. Whether that reflected one person's attitude or something more, Anton never forgot it. Crystal's ashes were eventually scattered beneath the Hollywood sign, the same city she'd moved to hoping would make her dreams come true. Instead, it became the place where her story ended. Officially, Crystal Spencer's death remains unexplained. There has never been an arrest. No cause of death has ever been established. And despite fingerprint evidence confirming investigators had the correct body, questions surrounding the autopsy have never completely disappeared. Maybe Crystal died from a rare medical condition that investigators simply couldn't identify. Maybe crucial evidence was lost because her body wasn't discovered for days. Or maybe the screams her neighbors heard that night were connected to something far more sinister. Whatever the truth is, it seems to have disappeared with her. And more than 30 years later, the mystery of what really happened inside Crystal Spencer's apartment remains unsolved. Let me ask you something. If your car broke down in the middle of nowhere at 2 in the morning, what would you do? Most of us would reach for our phones and call for help. We'd probably complain about our luck, text someone our location, and wait for roadside assistance. But in the early 1970s, on a lonely mountain road in Malaysia, none of that was possible. For decades, people across the country have shared the same chilling story. Some believe it's based on a real incident. Others believe it's one of Malaysia's oldest urban legends. Whatever its true origins may be, the story has survived for more than 50 years. And once you hear it, you'll understand why. A husband and wife were driving home late one night along a winding mountain road toward Ginting Highlands. The deeper they drove into the mountains, the quieter everything became. The jungle stretched endlessly on both sides of the road, and the only light came from the car's headlights cutting through the darkness. Then, without warning, the engine coughed. The car slowed and finally rolled to a stop. The husband climbed out, opened the hood, and stared at the engine for a few moments. He wasn't a mechanic, but like most people, he was hoping the problem would be something simple. It wasn't. After trying everything he could think of, he looked at his wife and made a decision. "I'm going to find help." Before leaving, he locked the doors and reminded her not to open them for anyone until he returned. She watched him disappear down the empty road. At first, she wasn't worried. He'd probably find another driver or a nearby village. She glanced at the dashboard clock every few minutes. 10 minutes passed, then 30. Before long, more than an hour had gone by. The road remained empty. The jungle seemed louder now. Just as she started wondering whether she should leave the car herself, she heard a heavy thud on the roof. Her heart skipped. She stayed perfectly still, listening. Maybe it was a fallen branch. Maybe an animal had jumped onto the car. She repeated those possibilities over and over, trying to calm herself down. Then another thud echoed across the roof. This one sounded heavier. Moments later, she heard something dragging slowly across the metal above her. Not running, not scratching wildly, just slow, deliberate movement from one side of the roof to the other. She didn't dare look outside. She simply gripped the steering wheel and waited for it to stop. Eventually, it did. A few minutes later, headlights appeared in the distance. Finally, someone could help. As the first car approached, she waved desperately through the window. The driver slowed down, flashed the headlights several times, then drove away without stopping. A second car passed. The driver did exactly the same thing. Then another. Every passing driver seemed to flash their headlights before disappearing into the darkness. No one stopped. She couldn't understand it. If they could see she needed help, why keep driving? Hours later, flashing police lights finally appeared. Relief washed over her. But something about the officers seemed unusual. Instead of walking directly toward the car, they remained several yards away. One officer called out loudly, "Ma'am, listen carefully. We need you to unlock the door. Step out slowly. Walk toward us." He paused. "And whatever you do, don't look back." Now think about that. If someone tells you not to look behind you, that's probably the exact moment you become desperate to know what's behind you. She opened the door, stepped out, closed it gently, then began walking toward the officers. She managed only a few steps before curiosity got the better of her. She turned around. Perched on top of the car was a pale woman with impossibly long black hair covering most of her face. In some versions of the story, she's feeding on the husband's body. In others, she's holding his severed head while silently watching the woman walk away. And in some tellings, no one ever says exactly what was on the roof, only that the sight was so horrifying it stayed with her for the rest of her life. Many people associate the figure with the Pontianak, a spirit from Malay folklore said to haunt lonely roads, forests, and isolated places after dark. Whether the story began with a real incident or simply grew into one of Malaysia's most enduring urban legends is still debated today. No verified police report has ever settled the question, and no definitive evidence has confirmed exactly what happened that night. Maybe that's why the story has survived for so long, because it leaves just enough room to wonder. The next time you're driving down a lonely road after midnight and you hear something land on your roof, you might remember the story that's been told across Malaysia for more than half a century, and you might decide it's better not to look.